Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this public webinar, Conversations on COVID and COVID-19 vaccines. I will allow a few more minutes so that we can get more people joining. We just opened the webinar, so we'll start. I will give this another 4 minutes. So we'll start 5 minutes past the hour. So please continue to join, and if there's someone who was joining and they're late, just nudge them because I see the numbers going up. So just give it another 3 minutes and we start, but you're in the right place and we are going to make this work. Please remember that it's also streaming on Facebook, it's streaming on YouTube. And when you have questions, please put them on the Q&A so that we can be able to track. We have a team helping me to track this. So please make sure that you put your questions there. And if you have comments, feel free to use the chat. But for questions, as much as possible, use the Q&A. So just 3 more minutes to get more people to join us, but you're in the right place. Welcome. Okay, good. I would like us to start now. And if you can hear me, if you can see me clearly, you can just put a thumbs up on your chat. I want this to be interactive. We have decided to use the webinar version so that we reduce interruptions. As you know, when you do where everyone is on, then you have to keep saying, please mute. Some people join these webinars when they're waiting for a matatu to go home or for their public transport to go home. Others are, kind of doing another meeting. So I hope you find this as interactive as is possible. We decided to use the webinar for your safety and so that everyone can follow without disruptions. But to make it interactive, thank you very much. I see thumbs up, thumbs up. To make it interactive, please put your questions on the Q&A once again, and put your comments or chat. If you just want to comment, you can put that on the chat. I have a team that's helping me to do this from AMREF. I have Liz Ntonjira, who heads our communications globally, and I have Maurice Matheka from our ICT team. So they have agreed to help me on this webinar to just make sure that it goes smoothly. So I will share with you a few slides, and then we can take that up. And please remember that it's also streaming on Facebook and also on YouTube. So you can also tell other people to follow there. And feel free to also comment on those platforms so that more and more people can see what's going on. So let's dig into this conversation. The first thing I want to say is that this is not the first time that the world has had a pandemic of this nature. Many will remember 1918 with the big flu that happened then. But then, even after that, we've had pandemics, the HIV pandemic. We've had also other pandemics, epidemics that come up. And every time there is something like that, you must then act quickly. Just like if there was a threat of fire in your house, you wouldn't wait to see whether the fire will spread. You would actually act with panic and alarm. And often you want to overreact so that you cut it short. If you end up pouring more water than the fire needed, it is fine because you did what was necessary for you to feel comfortable that you put out the fire. And therefore, every time there's a pandemic, you will actually feel that people are overreacting. And that is what the sentiments I hear when I talk to people, the general public. I hear, you know, what is all this about? Some people say our government is overreacting. They are probably seeking money from donors and these kinds of things. But everything we do after the pandemic will seem inadequate, because if you wait when you see a small fire in your house and you say, let's see how it goes, and you don't pour the water early enough or excessive water early enough, then you'll be left wishing you did. And that is the thing about the pandemic, that you have to overreact and you have to put all the things you have on the table so that you avoid regret in the future. And because in pandemics, no one has perfect data. Data is evolving. People we are modeling, you're looking at what's happening. So you will always see, you always have to be ahead or try to be ahead of the virus. But the virus is always 2 steps ahead of you. If you see the case of India, India does regret and wish they had actually put more policy measures last year. But now, by the time they get hit, it is too late to put the policy measures, and you now just have to run and start responding to whatever you can at that particular time. This dilemma of how much to do when should not stop us from doing what we need to do to prepare. And therefore, this webinar is in a way just saying, I've had a lot of questions every time I'm invited to speak. People are like, can you post that? Can you tell us more about this? And therefore, I decided to do this public one so that as many people as possible can follow the conversation, so that they are not only happening in small groups of companies that may invite me. And I'm not the only one doing this. There are many people who are giving the information that is necessary. WHO has been the forefront. Africa CDC has been at the forefront. Governments have been at the forefront, and many other individuals like myself. So this is not a unique, exclusive conversation. I don't have exclusive information on COVID-19. I'm just an aggregator. I aggregate it from different sources and I provide it to the public. So I don't call myself a COVID-19 expert. No, I'm not. I'm just an aggregator of data to provide it to the public because sometimes it's not condensed into a form that the public can consume. So I'm doing this so that we can reach out to everyone. And this is being recorded, hopefully, and therefore we'll be able to share it as well. And we need to reach out to everyone without creating panic, and encourage so that we are all working together. Now, I had a lot of times last year, people saying, Africa has been spared the pandemic, Africa has been spared the pandemic. The truth is Africa has not been spared the pandemic. There has been a lot of issues, of social fatigue now, socioeconomic pressures, delayed vaccination. And you can see across the continent, we've had a lot of trouble, and you'll see how, the pandemic is panning out across the continent. But if you look across, countries imposing curfew, reimposing curfew, you're seeing, deaths in Zimbabwe, in Namibia. We had a huge crisis happening recently. In Namibia, we have lost senior leaders, and we continue to lose loved ones. I myself have lost loved ones, during this pandemic. So it's close to us. It's as close to us as can be. And in my view, the reason this feeling of Africa being spared was because, of course, after starting in China, Europe got hit quite hard. Then America got hit. And then there was a feeling that, we are not seeing much movement in Asia and in Africa. And my own personal view is that it is all about mobility. It's all about economic activity. It's all about urbanization. So the virus will attack first where there is high mobility, high urbanization, high mixing of people, and then move on to places where those indices are less, there is less urbanization. And therefore, that's why Africa was coming later. And even now, we are not sure that Africa is not going to face a crisis like India if we don't vaccinate fast enough. There's no way of knowing. We are seeing now countries that thought it was over getting, Kenya has just been going through its fourth wave. I'm seeing Morocco going through an acceleration. I'm seeing the same happening in other places. So we cannot drop our guard, and we will continue to see that we cannot drop our guard. That we'll continue to see. So the message I'm giving you is that it's not over. Even in your country, you are seeing the wave you are in coming down. It is just that the waves move like that. You move, you have a surge, then the surge burns out the nearest population. It burns out, spreading. And once there is all the other people have been infected, it kind of slows down, then finds a new population or community of people who are vulnerable, starts again. And we know now that we are also suffering from new variants. And therefore, those variants might also look for populations that were already infected and recovered and infect them again. So this is going to continue until we can vaccinate as many people as possible. This is the situation in Africa as of today. You can see we had our earlier wave last year. Then we got another wave somewhere in November, December. And now Africa is going through this surge again, which is, if you look at the number of daily deaths, they map the surges in infections. Of course, not everyone who is infected gets to hospitalization or gets to severe disease. Majority of the people don't actually even know they have COVID. They don't get symptoms. A lot of others have symptoms, but they're mild. A very small number will end up in hospital, and a much smaller number will die. And the reason for this is obviously risk. And we'll talk about the risk profile of those people who are more likely to end up in hospitalization. But doesn't mean that the rest who are not in that risk profile don't have the danger. They also do have the danger. And we are now seeing that with the Delta variant, we are seeing much more younger people also being affected. So we must always watch that the risk profile can keep changing depending on how the virus is changing as well. But this is where we are. And you can see countries like South Africa now are just dipping. Does it mean that's the end of COVID in South Africa? No. It could start rising again in another wave. South Africa just had their wave just recently. Morocco is experiencing a rise in numbers in both infections and deaths. Tunisia is coming down. So you can see this keeps going, and countries will be at their own different times, and that will keep changing. So there is no single wave of a continent. There is no single wave of a country. They happen community by community, but then the aggregate numbers are what we end up seeing. So what does a wave mean, therefore? What does this mean, when you're seeing that going up, and where do we take the measures that we need to take? It's because out of these people infected, some of them may end up in severe disease, and some of them may end up dying, and you don't want people to die. So in between this wave of infection and this wave of death is a wave of hospitalization, people who are in hospital. And where we look at is how big is the wave of people requiring hospitalization out of the wave of people infected. And if the wave of people requiring hospitalization is too high, then you have to close down certain economic activity that may be propagating the rise of the hospitalizations, because you must protect your health system. Because the single most important thing during this kind of pandemic where people are getting sick is to ask yourself, how many people can we take care of at a particular time? And if your health system is not strong enough, and therefore you can only take care of few people in a pandemic, then you have to lock down or you have to put measures in place to reduce the number of people requiring hospitalization. So each country must have a number and say, you know, we think that we can't accommodate more than 1,000 people in hospital. And therefore, if you see the number rising towards 1,000, then you have to take measures to reduce the rate of infection so that you reduce the number of people requiring hospitalization so that you can protect people's lives. Therefore, when you hear the conversation of we want to flatten the curve, it is to flatten it below your health system. That is really what flattening the curve means. It's not chasing away the virus. The virus is still there. But how do you make sure the wave is always below the size of your health system? Which also means that this conversation is very properly linked to the conversation on the universal health coverage. That if countries invest in universal health coverage, then it means that they can protect their lives of their people, whether there is a pandemic or not in this one and in the future. Because if you only have, for example, 1,000 nurses who are taking care of critical care patients, then you say, if one nurse can only take care of one patient, then you can only take care of only 1,000 patients. This is theoretical. You can only take care of 1,000 people in critical care at one time. But if you have 2,000 critical care nurses, then you can take care of 2,000 patients at a time, meaning that you can accommodate a bigger wave, and therefore you can probably protect your economy by letting the infection go on a little because you can take care of the people. If you have 10,000 critical care nurses, it means now you have more capacity to actually take care of people who may get sick without having to lock down the economy. So the universal health care coverage agenda is actually at the critical conversation within this pandemic and any other future pandemic. And this is why we say that universal health coverage is needed most importantly by those who are poor, by those who don't have enough resources, because that's the only way to protect. I've seen people now spend up to $5,000 in hospital because of COVID, $5,000. And this is where we talk about vaccines. Vaccines are actually a cheaper investment than going to hospital to be taken care of with COVID. So this is the concept of the flattening the curve. But the ultimate flattener of the curve is vaccines, because once you get people vaccinated, then you have less and less people requiring hospitalization. So even if people are infected, you have less and less requiring hospitalization because that's what vaccines do. So vaccines are the ultimate flattener of the curve. Let me say that again, that when you have unvaccinated people, they have a higher chance of, when they get infected, they have a higher chance of requiring hospital. But when people are vaccinated, they have a lower chance, even if they get infected, of requiring the hospital. And therefore, vaccines protect individuals by protecting the health system, by making sure that people who are vaccinated are less and less likely to be hospitalized. So vaccines are the ultimate flattener of the curve. So we talk about risk, and I talked about people getting infected, but not everyone requiring hospitalization. Why so? Of course, when you talk about people who are vaccinated, they are less likely to require hospitalization. But what about even removing the vaccination from the equation for now? This is just an example from data that I have from Kenya, that if you look at the number of people who are reported positive, of course, these are not the number of people infected. We know there are many more infected, but you don't know them. Many of them don't get tested because testing rates are low, or they don't get symptoms, so they don't know they get infected, but they move on with their lives. But based on the data available of the test done, you can see that the bulk of the infections will be between the people of 20 years to 49 years, because those are the people with the most economic activity. They are moving around, they're going to school, they're going to work, they're going to the markets, and that is the place where the most of the infections will be found naturally, statistically. But when you look at the people who are actually ending up being reported dead from COVID, it is predominantly not that category of 20 to 49, it is predominantly those who are 50 and above. And you can see therefore that the biggest risk of hospitalization and death is actually age, 50 and above. Then secondly, followed by people with hypertension, diabetes, and that's what we call people with comorbidity. People who have another disease, and these diseases are also more prevalent in people who are about 50 years and above. So you can see there's a correlation between the comorbidity. Hypertension rises with age, diabetes may rise with age. Of course, we have children who get diabetes, what we call type 1, when they're young and they're born with it, but generally these conditions will be in the elderly. And also the age itself is a big risk, which then explains why, even when we are talking about vaccines, we are saying vaccinate first those above 50, vaccinate first those who have hypertension, vaccinate first those who have diabetes. And therefore the question that I keep getting all the time, my mother has diabetes, should she get vaccinated? Yes, actually, she is the first on the queue. If you have a parent who has hypertension or diabetes, don't fear to vaccinate them because they should be the first on the queue. People who are above 50 should be the first on the queue because of this risk that is here. So the fear of vaccinating people because you think that they have hypertension, therefore they should not be vaccinated, is exactly the reverse. Those are the people we want vaccinated because you can see they're the ones who have the highest risk of hospitalization and death. So please remember that. But I wanted to show you this relationship with infections are largely in the younger population, 20 to 49, but the severity of the disease, hospitalization and death is in the higher population of 50 and above and people with comorbidities. So what do we need to do before we go to vaccines? What do we need to do to reduce transmission then? To ensure that even as we talk about these waves, we are actually protecting the health system by reducing the number of people infected, therefore reducing the number of people who need the health system, therefore keeping our people safe as we wait to get vaccinated. You need to watch what is the triad of the C's. The triad of the 3 C's means that the COVID, and I talked about this earlier, I said the reason Africa came later is because Africa's urbanization is lower, Africa's mobility, we move people around in small vehicles, whereas Europe and US moves people in big trains. You can move 1 million people from city to city in a day. Here we move people in public transport of 14 people at a go, on a motorcycle, 2 people at a go. So movement is low. Because of these 3 C's, that is why Africa doesn't have a lot of crowding, doesn't have a lot of close contact. You can say we do so in cities, but actually when you look at our rural areas, people are living far from each other, So when you combine these 3 C's, they are much lower in our continent. But then individually, we need to say that for me to protect myself from getting infected and therefore transmitting the virus, I need to be away from crowded places where there are many people. I need to be away from where there are close contacts and then confined spaces. And therefore, when you hear the government announcing these things, the advisors look at these 3 things. Why is it that we are likely to get the biggest gain of reducing infection? It is where we can close down or reduce people being in crowded spaces, in close contact, in confined spaces, which is why now you see social places being the first to be affected. Of course, this is negatively impacting the economy, but the places that are more likely to be these 3 C's, and also the time dimension, because it also means that even in a crowded space where people are in close contact, in a confined room for a long time, you're more likely to get infected. And you can look at where that is likely. That's in clubs, social places, which then explains the concept of curfew. People have asked, does it mean the virus moves at night? It is because that people are more likely to be in crowded places where they're in close contact, in a confined space in the evening. Because during the day they're working or they are doing the economic activity in the market. In the evening, they congregate into places that are likely to have these 3 C's, and for a long time, people get to the place of leisure from 6, they stay on until past midnight or 4 a.m. Therefore, when you have curfew, it means you only allow a shorter time. So the time dimension within these 3 C's is reduced. So this is the concept of curfew that people keep asking, why curfew? Now, if by mistake or by bad luck, then somebody gets infected and they're high risk, as we've talked, and they are being managed at home, the most important factor is to watch out for their oxygen level. People get worried about sneezing, loss of taste, coughing, but all those may be called normal common symptoms, whether they are by COVID or by common cold or by flu. The most important symptom or feature to look out for in somebody who is positive for COVID and at high risk, as we said, elderly, people with hypertension, diabetes, and they are being managed at home, is to watch their oxygen level. That is the most important thing to do. And therefore, when you have somebody who is positive with COVID being managed at home, you need access to this small gadget called a pulse oximeter. It's a tiny gadget, and this gadget will cost you maybe $10, $15, $20, depending on where you are, but you don't need to own one yourself, because if you can't afford it, it's fine. Your local community health worker, your local health worker should be able to have one. It looks something like this. It's very tiny. If you can see, it looks like that. And you just open it and you put your finger in and then it's going to read. It's a very small gadget. This gadget is life-saving. The reason this gadget is important is because we have something in COVID called silent hypoxia. I've done a video about this. And if you need the video, you can share and it will be sent to you. Very short video that says that COVID, the virus, when it infects you, ideally, if it's in the nose and the mouth, it still gives you some mild symptoms. Then after that, if it moves down to your lungs and your immunity is not strong enough because of your age or because you have hypertension, diabetes, or other condition, then it has to infect the lungs. Now, when the lungs are infected, what happens, you can see, I don't know that you can see, mine is reading 95%. Hopefully you can see that. Not very good visual there. But when it gets to your lung, your lungs start to respond. Your body starts to fight. Your body fights the virus because it fights an infection. Many of you, when you were young, and maybe even now you see, when you're young, you get these small boils on the skin. Maybe you got pricked by something and you got a small boil. And that boil then has an infection inside. And what happens? It swells. The boil is actually a swelling. What causes the swelling? It is because the pathogen, bacteria or virus or whatever has infected you, the body is fighting it through its own immunity. It's fighting that foreign virus or bacteria or fungus or whatever it is. Or indeed, if you have malaria, it is fighting the parasite. That's why you get a fever, because the body is trying to fight whatever is affecting it. That fight creates something called inflammation. Inflammation means there is swelling, there is some heat, and there is some liquid being produced. So these features of inflammation, you can see them when it's a boil. You can see them in your skin. You can see it's hot, it is swollen, it's feeling painful. Now, that's exactly what happens when your lungs are infected by the virus. The body is fighting it. And in that fight, you get the same inflammation, swelling, heat inside the lungs, a lot of production of water. And this is what stops your lungs from being able to absorb the oxygen that you normally absorb on a normal day when you have normal lungs. Right now, you can see the way I'm speaking. My lungs are normal. They're absorbing adequate oxygen from the air surrounding me and giving me adequate oxygen. But if they get infected by pneumonia, which could be caused by, you see children with pneumonia all the time, could be caused by bacteria, or by COVID, which is a virus, then the lungs get burdened by this process of inflammation, trying to fight this infection. What happens is that inflammation then creates a lot of water along the lining that's supposed to collect the oxygen to your body. And this is then when you start now having oxygen dropping. Ideally, if you've seen a child with pneumonia, as soon as the infection affects their level of oxygen, what happens? They start panting. That's why when a child has pneumonia, we check the number of breaths from their chest. If they're going, and you say, there's pneumonia, because you see the way the lungs are working hard to give oxygen. Now, in COVID, that panting doesn't happen. Why so? Because the virus and the process of the virus has a way of resetting your reflex that should ideally tell you it is time to pant, the way a child pants when they have pneumonia, or even an adult when they have pneumonia. They are breathless. The COVID virus resets your reflex so that your lungs are reducing oxygen, but your body is not responding through panting. So you see this thing called silent hypoxia. You have low oxygen, but the person is normal. They are talking to you, but the only features you find is they may be a bit tired. They may have some fatigue. Elderly people may also have what we call some confusion. They'll be talking to you and they'll say, remind me your name again, and they know you well. Very mild confusion. Or they'll tell you, please move for me this seat, and they don't sit. But at the same time, they may have some fatigue. They are walking, maybe they walk, they stagger a little, but they are okay. By the time, if you then decide to measure the oxygen at that point, you may find it's down to about 70%, and yet it's supposed to be above 95%. And that point, to take them to the hospital, they'll go straight to ICU. And that's how a lot of people end up dying, because by the time they go to the ICU or to the hospital, their oxygen level is so low, it's not compatible with life. But nobody knows, because the COVID is hiding the fact that the oxygen is low. And that is the most important feature to monitor when you are managing a COVID patient at home. I spend time on that issue because people have called me and they have lost loved ones because they didn't realize that the oxygen level was so low by the time they took them to the hospital. So please, when you have somebody managing at home with COVID, it's important to know their saturation of oxygen. And that can be by you having this small gadget, or by you actually taking them to the nearest hospital to be checked, or getting a health worker to come home and check them. That's an important message. Now, let's move to vaccines now, because that's what brought many of us here. And we want to ask ourselves the question, so what is the role of vaccines? Now, I talked about what we are doing now to ensure that we protect the health system, that we protect it so that those who are sick and need the health system can be taken care of. What we need to do so, we need to physically distance, avoid crowded places where people are in close contact. If you are unwell, stay home, because it could be COVID and you don't be the one transferring the virus to those other people. Stay home as much as possible. Secondly, when you're going to the public place, if you really have to go, and therefore you are not able to physically distance because you need to go and work, you are a mason, you need to go to the construction site, or you sell bananas, you need to go and sell your bananas, or you need to go to the office because maybe there's something you need to do, then wear your mask. And when you wear your mask, it stops you from shedding the virus to other people. Also protects you from picking viruses that are being shared by other people. It's now very clear that those virus exchange is the biggest route of communication or infection by COVID. Then keep washing your hands and practice cough etiquette, cough into your elbow. All those things are about trying to keep the virus from infecting you or you passing it on. Avoiding being in a crowded place, especially for a long time. If you have to go and see somebody who is in a pub, a social place, and you must go, then go where your mask, go in and go out. But if you sit there, then you remove your mask to take a drink and you stay there for long, then you increase your chance of infection. Then whenever you're in a closed space, because it's unavoidable, people will still need to be in a boardroom, in a meeting, in a classroom, open the windows so that there is proper ventilation. Then if you get infected, isolate yourself or quarantine yourself. Now, all these things, at the end, the ultimate curve reducer of reducing risk of people getting hospitalized is the vaccines. That is why we are saying that vaccines are important, not because they stop infection. And this is a critical message. Vaccines do not stop you from being infected. They reduce the rate of infection, and I'll explain that. So let me say, when the vaccines are given, and we'll talk about how they work, they help your body to recognize the virus if it comes and infects your body in future. And therefore, your body develops memory of how that virus could look, even if it has not been infected, the body has not been infected, but also develops antibodies. It's almost like, let me give this analogy. It's like you live in a house and you have built burglar proofing. When you build this burglar proofing is supposed to help you not to be attacked or for enemies to come into your space. But this is general, anybody, it's stopping everybody. But one day you might know, actually, I know my enemy. And that enemy is somebody looking for you because of a particular problem. Now, you now understand how that enemy operates, and therefore you may decide to change your car so that they don't recognize you, or you may decide to go to the police and put an injunction because you know the enemy. That's how vaccines work. So your body already has the burglar proofing to stop you from being infected by anything unknown. But when you now know the particular enemy, now you can put measures against that particular enemy. That is now vaccines. That's when you give the body the vaccine, the body now knows how the enemy would look like. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And therefore develops antibodies or develops certain memory to say, if this enemy comes close to me, this is how to fight this particular enemy. Just similar to the analogy I've given you. So vaccines are therefore a critical part of this chain of actually reducing the rate of people who may need to be hospitalized. Now, do the vaccines stop infection. Not many vaccines are able to stop infection. Very few vaccines, actually, including the ones we give to children, very few vaccines develop what we call neutralizing antibodies. Neutralizing antibodies are antibodies produced at the site of infection, meaning that if the COVID vaccine enters through your nose and through your mouth, as soon as it enters, your body develops neutralizing antibodies that kills the virus before it goes to infect you, so that it doesn't replicate beyond that. But not many vaccines are able to do that. Very, very few are able to do that. So many vaccines will not produce enough to stop the infection, but they will give the body enough fighting chance to stop severe disease. That is why you are seeing countries like Israel that have vaccinated many people still having a surge of infection, but they are not having as many hospital cases as they would if they had not vaccinated. So the most important point to note about vaccines is they are stopping you from developing severe disease. They are not stopping you from getting mild disease. That's important to note. So vaccines, we don't have to argue about it. Vaccines work. We have used vaccines to reduce death from mumps, measles, rubella. We have used them to eliminate completely polio. These were cases of polio in the 1980s. Look how they have disappeared through vaccination. And there are many types of vaccines. We can see all of them here. And the way we make vaccines is you can make them by probably taking the infecting organism and then using that to make a vaccine by reducing its ability to infect, or you can kill it and then separate the proteins, that's what we call antigens, and then use those to inject the human being, because then the body recognizes the protein and creates the antibodies. Or you can divide it and use a small part of it, or you can even inactivate it completely and use the toxin or whatever the virus or bacteria produces. So there are many ways of producing vaccines. And we'll talk about how scientists have developed the specific COVID ones in a minute. But you can see vaccines work. Diphtheria, whooping cough, otherwise called whooping cough. The vaccine started in 1921, and you can see what has happened. Diphtheria, whooping cough has disappeared. But many of our people died in the 1940s, 30s, 1930s through whooping cough. You can see polio. It came up, increased. The vaccine was introduced in 1955. Polio has disappeared, literally. But you can see the number of people who used to die of polio. Measles, the same. Many children died of measles in their thousands and millions. Measles vaccine came in 1963. Measles, children these days don't really die of measles, but you have to keep vaccinating every child who is born. So there's no debate that actually vaccines do work. So let's talk about how they work. I don't take you deep into the science, but I just want to highlight very quickly for you. The first thing to know is that your body has immunity, just like we talked about burglar proofing, making sure your windows are locked, your doors are locked. Your body also has a way of ensuring that you don't get attacks from known viruses, known bacteria, known parasites like malaria, known other intruders in your body. And the body has a way of keeping them at check so that you are healthy. And that starts from the time you are born. Now, the body has two ways of making sure that you have this immunity or protection against anything that may come to your body. When you're born, you do not know that there's malaria because you're protected in your mother's womb, in the uterus. You're protected. You do not know there is pneumonia bacteria that cause pneumonia. A child being born today doesn't know there's COVID virus because the body hasn't experienced it. But they also have some innate immunity that is born with them. And that's what we call non-specific. This is like burglar proofing your house for anything that may want to attack you. Could be an animal, could be a cat, a dog, a cow coming to your house, could be a thief, you don't know. That is non-specific, and your body is born with that. And your skin is part of that because your skin stops things from getting into your body. It has cells that can eat anything circulating in your blood. They see something foreign, they eat it, they destroy it. They're called killer cells. Then there are others that look, they just travel around your blood protecting you. Your body is amazing. They just circulate around the blood, anything foreign. They can hold it, destroy it, so that you don't get sick. But when you're born, you then also find things that need specific immunity. Like now the person trying to attack you, who knows how to find you in your office or on the way to work. That's now specific danger that you then develop strategies to fight that specific danger by changing your route or by changing your car, or by probably you see some people carrying a gun because they know somebody could attack them. Now that's what we call specific immunity. How does specific immunity develop? It starts from the time a baby is born, but could also start from inside the mother's womb. Now let's explain that. One, specific immunity can be acquired from infection, meaning that when a baby is born, or right now, we didn't know there was a coronavirus that could cause COVID. When your body meets it, it now develops specific immunity against it. How does it do so? It takes the virus that's inside your body, takes it, digests it, takes it inside something we call a B cell. The B cell then takes it, studies it, and then takes that knowledge of that virus or bacteria to something else. And then this other thing keeps memory of that virus, says, this is how this virus looks. We never knew this one before. This one is, okay, because this is how it looks. So it keeps a memory through things we call T cells. That memory lasts forever. And that memory now says, we know if this thing ever attacks us, we know it. Then this other thing called a B cell is taught now how to produce antibodies that now recognize this particular virus or bacteria that attacked you. Those antibodies then circulate in your body, and they are present in your body. And if this virus ever comes to your body, these antibodies, what they do, they're actually like a Y. They're like a Y. They go and attach to that virus. They attach from different angles, and they remove it from your blood system. And because there are billions of antibodies, and there are millions or so of this virus, your antibodies remove it. Remove the virus. What does that do? It removes the virus from circulation and reduces the chance of the virus continuing to multiply and infect you. That is how antibodies reduce your chance of getting to be hospitalized, because they reduce the chance of the virus from multiplying and attacking you further. Okay? So it's like now you have actually identified the enemy and you're able to fight the enemy early. Now you can develop that and those antibodies from a natural infection, but you must realize also that natural infection, by the time your body now learns, the B cells learn the virus, the T cells keep the memory, they fight, the virus could overwhelm your body and you could die. That is why infection is one way to develop immunity, but it's a dangerous way because it could kill you. Therefore, the next way to get this acquired immunity is to get vaccinated. So what is vaccination? Vaccination imitates infection without you getting the infection. It basically saying we are going to imitate the infection. How do you imitate the infection? You can take the virus that creates the disease, kill it with heat, and then give it to the body. So the proteins will still be recognized by the body, and the body will produce the memory and the antibodies, but without you getting the infection. Or you could take a part of it, or you could imitate it in many different ways and give it to the body. That's what vaccines do. They help you to get active acquired immunity. That's what they do. But a child in the mother's womb can also receive immunity either through the mother, if you're vaccinated or you are infected and you developed antibodies, they can cross over through the placenta and the baby gets some antibodies, which then help the baby to be protected against something they didn't know about. But by the time they are born, they have already acquired antibodies from the mother. Okay? That's one way. In fact, that's one advantage of saying if you're pregnant and you get vaccinated, you have double advantage. You get antibodies and your child gets antibodies. What about if you're pregnant and you get infected? You could die and your baby could die because you probably won't develop enough immunity before the disease overwhelms you. And that's the decision we are saying. It is now clear. The advice of the global obstetrician and gynecologist community is women who are pregnant should be vaccinated. And we know there is an advantage to the mother and also the child, because the child can acquire antibodies through transplacental passively. Okay? Breastfeeding, in some cases, the antibodies could cross over through breast milk. And these others, you can actually ignore them. But I wanted to explain how that vaccination happens. So where are we now with the COVID vaccines? We know there are many, and we probably just straight go there. There are 6 of them that are authorized by WHO now. But there are over 300 vaccines being tested globally. The World Health Organization, through their scientific Committee on Safety of Vaccines actually reviews the vaccines that are submitted to it and looks at all the data available, and we'll talk about what kind of data that is. And so far, they have approved 6 vaccines. Those 6 vaccines are Pfizer and Moderna, Sinopharm and Sinovac, and AstraZeneca and J&J. Those are the only ones that have been approved by WHO. Now, some countries are using vaccines even if they're not approved by WHO. Countries have decided this is our own, we will use our own approval, okay? And they use their own vaccines. Why? Because they're confident that they manufactured them, they have the data, and they can use them. Russia is using Sputnik, even if it's not approved by WHO. So WHO does not have to approve a vaccine for a country to use it. But for many countries that do not have the capacity to review every single vaccine, they have decided to rely on WHO. It's the same way when you buy a car, you rely on the people who review cars to tell you that car is safe. You don't say, me, I am buying this car, but I want my own mechanics. I'm going to establish my own system at home to make sure that every car I buy is safe. You rely on somebody who tells you we tested that car, it is safe. So many countries have decided to rely on WHO to say, these vaccines are safe. Therefore, the countries say, if WHO has said they are safe, we'll take them. So those 6 vaccines are the ones that are listed here. And those are the vaccines that countries that have decided to rely on WHO, many of them in Africa, are receiving, they are buying, or they are receiving from what we call the COVAX facility. So I also want to say that the COVAX is not a vaccine. The COVAX is a facility that assists countries to access vaccines that have been approved by WHO and delivers them to those countries. That's COVAX, COVID vaccine facility. And it can deliver either Pfizer, Moderna, Sinopharm, Sinovac, AstraZeneca, or J&J. Or countries can decide to go to other countries and say, we are friendly, please give us the vaccines you have. And that country can say, we have some spare Pfizer, here they are. Or the country can decide to go to Africa Union and say, which vaccines has Africa Union pre-negotiated for us? And then say it's J&J. So the country, oh, you are pre-negotiated J&J, it's approved by WHO, we have some money, or we are getting some money, we are being helped, can we purchase? That's the process of acquiring these vaccines. Now, let me mention that out of these 3 groups, you see I've grouped them. These Pfizer and Moderna, the technology used is what we call messenger RNA, meaning that the scientists went to the lab and decided to create something called a messenger RNA, which is then is going to imitate the virus, the way the RNA lives in the virus. That mRNA is what you're going to be given as a messenger. And your body recognizes this message and then makes antibodies based on the message instruction is being given. That is new technology. It's not been used before. It is new and is going to change the history of medicine, not only for vaccines, but also for vaccines for other diseases like HIV. It's going to change the way we treat cancer, we treat other diseases. It's a new technology because science is always evolving. Now, Sinopharm and Sinovac are using the same technology we use for whooping cough. I showed you earlier, diphtheria, hepatitis A, rabies, HPV. The same way we make these vaccines is the same way the manufacturers of Sinopharm and Sinovac have made this. The way we made the Ebola vaccine is the way AstraZeneca and J&J have made theirs. So some of these technologies are known, they have been used. This one is new. So you can see it's evolving science. Now, the question I get all the time, and I'm going to come to an end so that I pick up some of the questions that I will not have answered through this presentation. The question I always get is, why, and even we got it today, why is it that vaccines, the COVID vaccine has been developed so quickly? So let me try and answer that question. The process of creating a vaccine is as follows. One, the company that is doing the research and development, and this will be a pharmaceutical company that makes other drugs or medicines or health commodities, will decide we want to make a vaccine for HIV, we want to make a vaccine for malaria, we want to make a vaccine for measles, we want to make a vaccine for COVID. They will do the research the virus itself, how does it behave, they'll do all that. Now, that research will be done over many years because remember that the virus that causes COVID-19 is not new. It is a coronavirus. We have over 1,000 coronaviruses over time, over hundreds of years. Now, these 1,000 mainly live in animals. But in the last several years, because of the human-animal interaction, These viruses have also started to affect human beings. How do they affect human beings? They cause a common cold. There are some of them. So there are 7 coronaviruses out of the 1,000 that have actually finally infected human beings. One of them is the one that causes, one of them causes common colds, called a coronavirus, causes common colds. One of them is what caused the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome that was talked about a few years ago. The other one is the one that caused SARS. So there are some that are known to infect human beings. So there has been research ongoing to understand coronaviruses from different animals. How do they behave? So that research was already available because the coronavirus that causes COVID is not a new type of virus. The coronaviruses are in the same family. That research was available. Secondly, development. That development now is based on the platforms I showed you, saying what platform of making vaccines do we use? They were already available. And the mRNA that I talked about had already been researched even before. Now, in this series of development, then you move to testing. In testing, you follow stages. The first stage is now that you've developed the vaccine you think can work in human beings, you don't start with human beings, you start with animals. You take the animals and you do studies on the animals, give them the vaccine, infect them with the virus and look how it behaves. And once you have enough data, you take that data to the regulator. The regulator looks at it and says, this data is adequate. And because it's adequate, we are now going to allow you to test on human beings who are volunteers. Volunteers. So people who are courageous enough sign and say, I volunteer to be in the first testing of this vaccine. And this can also happen for drugs. It also happens for drugs, not only vaccines. Those people, about 100 of them are the ones allowed, only about 100 volunteers. You give them, you do exactly the same. Give them the vaccine, give some of them what we call a placebo, a similar, something that they can't tell. So they can't tell who got the vaccine and who did not. Then you monitor them. And when you have robust data, you then go to the second stage and say, now we have data, review it. The regulator, whether it's the Food and Drug Administration, whether it's the European Medical Agency, they review, they say, now it's safe enough, it's robust enough, we allow you to go to clinical phase 2. In that clinical phase 2, you're now allowed to test it with more volunteers of up to 1,000 people. It's only after getting these steps going through that you're allowed now to go to the stage 3 of the clinical stage 3, which is where now you go, mass, and you now provide this to majority of people and continue with monitoring data and providing that data back to regulators. Now, what happened with COVID vaccines is, I've told you that research was ongoing for many years, development was happening. Now, testing started at the same time with manufacturing development so that you could actually reduce the period so that by the time you are testing and the test and the approvals are done, you have already manufactured and developed the vaccine. But not this, that you could actually manufacture and develop, and then the approval doesn't happen, and therefore you make a loss because you have to destroy everything you manufacture. So how was this risk covered? This risk was covered with excess money. The US government spent in excess of 1.5 billion, for example, assisting Pfizer and Moderna to develop, meaning that the risk of developing and lack of approval was already covered. Same with the UK government when AstraZeneca was being developed by the Oxford University. A lot of money was provided to cover these risks, to accelerate, to get more human resources to do this work. And finally, you deliver. This combination of these phases is what made the COVID vaccine available faster than the normal timeline. Now, are vaccines working? This is very mild data. And I know there are many studies. I don't share them here. We've seen studies from Israel, seen studies from the UK. I'll share one or so. But you can see in one hospital, which I've just picked as an example, we don't have to discuss the particular hospital. Out of all the cumulative admissions in August, they had 104. Out of those, 95 out of 104 were not vaccinated. Only 9 were vaccinated, okay? And out of those 9, 7 were 1 dose and only 2 were 2 dose. So you can actually see even when you move now to HDU, majority of the ones who went to HDU, 17 out of 19 were those who were not vaccinated. Meaning that even out of those who were vaccinated, only 2 ended up in HDU and only one was actually fully vaccinated. When you go to ICU, none of the people of these two who had 2 doses ended up in ICU. So you can start to see early data tells you that people who are vaccinated may still get infected, but it's highly unlikely that they'll end up in ICU. And that's really what you want. You want a vaccine that protects you from severe disease that takes you to HD or ICU. So this other requirement that I also want one that protects me from being infected, it's kind of a superficial need as long as that vaccine gives you protection against severe disease. Now, this is a recent study, July 2021, by the Public Health England. And the study is there, you can review it. And it says vaccines highly effective against hospitalization from Delta variant. This is important because it refers to, at least within this study, they looked at 2 vaccines. And this is why recently there was, many of you, if you're not in Kenya, ignore this remark, but there was a letter circulating saying, if you got AstraZeneca, you need to be worried about Delta variant. Please go out to the country and look for either Moderna or Pfizer. And I am on record publicly as opposing that opinion. And the reason I oppose that opinion is because of this data and other data. Look at this. Pfizer vaccine is 96% effective against hospitalization after 2 doses. Okay? AstraZeneca, 92% effective against hospitalization after 2 doses. So that 4% difference is neither here nor there. Scientifically, you say, there's a confidence level, 4 percentage points difference is neither here nor there. So you can say the 2 are equally effective against hospitalization after 2 doses. Both that data is comparable with vaccine effectiveness against hospitalization from the Alpha variant, meaning that against the variant of Alpha before and the variant of Delta, they are both effective equally. But when you have only 1 dose, they are both 17% less effective at preventing symptomatic illness from Delta variant compared to Alpha. So you can see that vaccine effectiveness against symptomatic illness is actually less for Delta than Alpha. So no one is saying that they are not less effective. The Delta variant has a way of escaping the vaccine slightly. But when it comes to both doses, it actually is as responsive as Alpha to both Pfizer and AstraZeneca. And that is critically important because it says that whereas it is less effective on 1 dose of either Pfizer or AstraZeneca compared to Alpha, but when there is 2 doses, it is actually very small difference, meaning it's as effective. So we must trust vaccines, and we must remember that the best vaccine is the one in your arm, is the one that it's available to you. Let me then very quickly talk about this variant issue, because it's important for people to realize that variants are many of them. Thousands of variants arise at any one time. Thousands. Each vaccine, let me explain to you that when we talked around a virus entering your body, it's entering to use you as a photocopy machine. It's not entering to kill you. It's entering to use you as a system of replicating its own gene for the future. Just like we as human beings, we reproduce to maintain our genes. Just like animals reproduce to maintain their genes. The virus is entering you because it's not able to reproduce on its own. It needs a host to replicate and photocopy itself, infect others so that it can live. It is trying to live. It's survival for the fittest. But in the process, if it overwhelms you, then you die. And that's disadvantage to the virus, because then the host has died, so it can no longer propagate itself. So when it is photocopying itself inside you, errors arise. And when those errors arise, and if you, let me see, I hope you can still hear me. When those errors arise, that is how variations exist and mutations arise. Now, many of these mutations don't change the virus at all. It just keeps on replicating. It's just a small error. It's the way you make a dress and there's a small error in the corner. It's fine. You keep going. But if the error is so big, then that dress cannot be used. The dress then is thrown into a place where maybe there's a discount. Now, this big error is what creates what we call a variant of concern, meaning that the virus now is no longer the same as what it was before. The era changes the virus, and it changes maybe the way it infects people, its severity, its speed of transmission, the way it interacts with vaccines, or the way it interacts with tests. So that then becomes a variant of concern. So when we are talking about Delta, it is the only reason we hear about it because it's a variant of concern. Do we have other variants? Yes. Do we have other variants of interest? Yes, many. That's why we've reached Delta, because we are following the Greek alphabet. All these others we are not hearing about are happening and they are of interest, but they haven't become variants of concern. Delta is a variant of concern because it is actually much more infectious, almost maybe 100 times more. Then it is also escaping the vaccine slightly, as you can see, but it is still managed. When you have 2 doses of either AstraZeneca or Pfizer or Moderna, this study was only looking at the 2. 2 doses protect you against this variant of concern, and those studies are published. Now, vaccines then have a problem because we don't have them. And you can see this is why some of us have been calling for vaccine equity, because you can see Africa carries 17% of the world's population, but has consumed only 1.6% of the world's vaccines so far. Whereas Asia, which is 59% of the world's population, has taken 55% of their consumed vaccines. Europe has actually taken more vaccines than its contribution of global population. US has taken more than twice the number of vaccines than its contribution of global population. So you can see why we are complaining. There's a big challenge there. Yet Africa does not manufacture. It manufactures less than 1% of its vaccines that it needs, 0 of the COVID vaccines. We don't have enough money in the continent. The health system capacity is not good. And there's a bit of hesitancy. So we have recognized this thing. And this is why some of us decide we are going to spare our time giving information to people, because we want people to also be aware and make informed decisions. I'll skip that about manufacturing. So as I come to a close on my presentation, quick facts: get vaccinated. Why? Because when you're vaccinated, you have less risk of illness. It doesn't mean you have 0 risk of illness. You have less risk of illness. You have milder symptoms. You don't require to go to the HD or the ICU if you are going to. You reduce the risk of infecting others because you actually reduce the replication of the virus in you. And therefore, even if you're infected, you cough less virus because your antibodies are reducing the rate at which your virus can replicate. So you reduce that. So when you're vaccinated, you also contribute to reducing the risk of infecting others. When you're not vaccinated, you are highly infectious, highly contagious. If you get infected, you have worse symptoms and you have a higher risk of illness. When you get vaccinated, after the first dose, within 14 days, you start to develop immunity. The second dose, as we have said, then enhances your protection. That's what it does. Now, there are questions around, what if I am infected? If you're infected, you also develop immunity. Like I talked about, you have natural immunity from infection as well. However, nobody knows what level of infection you need to have for you to develop adequate immunity, which is why we say, even if you're infected, you should still get the vaccines, because there's no way of measuring, did you get adequate antibodies, did you get adequate immunity? So, and also we have studies that are showing that immunity acquired from vaccination actually lasts longer than the natural one. So even if you're infected, that infection gives you some immunity. Therefore, when you get the other doses, you actually then get boosters. It's almost like if you're infected and you get 2 doses, it's like getting 3 doses, meaning you have a natural booster. But you still need to get vaccinated. That's critically important. Now, I will, maybe I'm sure there'll be questions around booster doses, and maybe I address it now. I've had people asking, is my country planning to give booster doses? Now, let me explain this, that if you have a natural immunity that is operating 100%, your body is fine, you're young, you're strong, it is likely that with 2 doses, you develop as much immunity as you need. If you're elderly, above 60, your immunity may not be as, your process of developing immunity, your immune system may not be as robust as if you're younger. So it is less likely that you'll develop, it's likely that you won't develop 100% immunity with 2 doses, like a young person. Meaning that even these cases we are calling breakthrough, meaning people are fully vaccinated, but then you hear they actually got
to ICU or HDU called breakthrough, meaning some people may still end up, they are the ones who are elderly, because it means that they didn't develop completely adequate immunity. Meaning that science is evolving that may ask that people above 65 may get a third booster. Some countries like Israel have started giving elderly people a third booster. In the US, they have started giving people who have an immune deficiency, maybe naturally, or they were born with an immune system that's not robust enough. They have started to say those people need a third dose. So this science is evolving, but for now, everyone is convinced that people who don't have an immune deficiency problem, people who are able to develop proper antibodies generally, people who are, are strong and healthy, are adequately protected with 2 doses. And actually, those young people who are rushing to get their third dose are denying people who deserve a vaccine a dose. So we should be satisfied that with 2 doses, we are protected. And the policy now of WHO in many countries is you don't need a third booster. And when you need a third booster, if we need a third booster, science will be clear about that. What about the issue of mixing vaccines? We've seen a lot of, small studies saying you should mix. But there are not robust studies to say which one do you mix with which one should come first. So whereas there's a study that says if you have AstraZeneca, you can take Pfizer in some country, in Germany, it doesn't say that now is policy. Because what about if you didn't have AstraZeneca in your country? What about if you don't have Pfizer, you have Moderna? Can Moderna replace Pfizer in the mixing? Can J&J replace this one? So there is no policy framework to guide mixing of vaccines. And that is why, whereas some studies are saying it is possible, there is no robust framework to guide, because then are people going to be traveling to find the one to mix with? So policy-wise, whereas science is saying there is room, science needs to evolve so that we have a proper framework that to guide policy. For now, don't mix vaccines because there is no policy framework to support that, because you know which one to mix with which, and what is the period between one vaccine and the other that you are mixing. Secondly, be satisfied with 2 doses unless there is advice otherwise from your health worker or from the government. We have talked about the fact that people infected who are vaccinated can actually transmit the virus to others. So please continue wearing your mask. The analogy I give is, even if you have a safety belt in your car, it doesn't mean now you avoid road traffic rules because you want to protect others. And also remember that even if you have a safety belt, if you have a more severe accident, you can still die, which means that even if you're vaccinated and you are reckless, you could still get a breakthrough infection if you're high risk. So we always remember that let's wear our mask until we have majority of the people vaccinated. Finally, I think I'll cover these myths, but I think I've covered most of them. I want to add that women who are pregnant, now there's enough data to say they should get vaccinated, especially because we know when a woman is pregnant, it's more likely that if she's infected, she has more severe disease than those who are not. So we advise women who are pregnant to get vaccinated. Women who are breastfeeding, we advise that they get vaccinated. Women who are planning to get pregnant, we advise that they get vaccinated, because there's no evidence at all that the vaccines interfere with fertility. There's no evidence that the vaccine creates impotence. There has been cases of disruption of menses, but there has been no scientific association between the vaccines and the disruption of the menses. And even when they happen, it's temporary. And it is highly likely that this is to do with anxiety after the vaccine, or indeed just the way the body is now actively working to develop antibodies, and therefore upsets the hormonal balance, and therefore you resort with a bit of menses disruption, which is temporary. So if there is a disruption, don't worry about it. Food allergies, no food allergy or any type of allergy should dissuade you from being vaccinated unless it is an allergy to the vaccine itself, meaning you received your first dose, you got a severe allergy, and therefore you won't receive your second dose until your health worker guides you on how to receive that. So this myth around eggs and chicken and have a food allergy should be ignored completely. I talked about, please do not fear to vaccinate our parents who have hypertension and diabetes. There is no negative impact of the vaccine on people with hypertension or diabetes or cancer or HIV. They are the ones who actually need to be vaccinated because they need to be protected, because if they get infected, they are likely to get severe disease. I want to stop there and then pick up some questions, and there are so many of them. So please give me a 2-minute water break or 3-minute water break as I look at the questions so that we can then answer as many as are there. So I'm taking a 3-minute water break as I distill the questions, and we will be done in on top of the hour. As we agreed, we'll be done by 8:30. Thank you very much for listening to. Just 3 minutes, don't go away. Wow, I am unable to summarize. The questions are so many that I don't think I'll be able to summarize those questions in any sensible manner. So I will answer 1 or 2 or 3, and then what we are going to do, because we also want to respect your time, is that I'm going to work with the team to summarize the questions. It's going to be a lot of work, because there are hundreds. We summarize the key areas, thematic areas, and I'm going to find a way of either doing short videos for them or doing audios and sharing. And because we probably have your email addresses, all the people who joined, then we are going to be able to find a way of communicating to you. Because it's not possible to summarize all the questions. And I really thank you, all the comments you made, really, really powerful. And I think this was good. It's good we decided to do this, because I'm seeing that there's a lot of hunger for information, because people want to make the right decisions. You are here because you want to make the right decision, but you need the right information to make the right decision. So we must not ignore the questions people are asking, because they are actually out of the need to make a decision. Now, there's a question that keeps coming saying, AstraZeneca. Why is AstraZeneca coming to Africa? Some other countries were saying they're not using it. Let me explain that. I have just told you that the AstraZeneca vaccine is as effective as Pfizer, Moderna, and other vaccines. Number one. Number two, remember that all these vaccines are almost 100%. They are 90 to 100% effective in protecting you against hospitalization, which is what matters. We really don't, you can get infected by COVID and get a mild disease, stay at home, take care of yourself, hydrate yourself, and then go back to work. What we don't want you to do is get infected, end up in a hospital, then maybe present, incur huge costs or even lose your life. And if you're pregnant, if you have COVID and you're in ICU and you're pregnant, then you could lose your child or yourself. So this is why vaccines are important, to protect you from severe disease. And all of them do protect you from severe disease, 90 to 100%. I've shown you the data. Now, what happened was that in the very early conversations on AstraZeneca, because we monitor all vaccines, all of them, not even COVID, even the ones we give to children, there is something called adverse events following immunization, meaning that when you give somebody a vaccine, the health system, the health workers, the individuals who receive the vaccine must report any adverse event, because then that is continuously collected and that continuously informs the scientists about what's going on. That's general for all vaccines. Adverse events following immunization. Now, when these started being given, the adverse events started being reported, as they should, okay? For AstraZeneca, we got reports of some blood clots. For J&J, I've seen reports of neurological, something called Bell's palsy. For Moderna, I've seen some reports of heart inflammation called myocarditis. So it doesn't mean that therefore this vaccine causes that particular condition to everybody. No, it doesn't. Just like if you take a malaria medication, you remember many of you used to take Fansida. There are people who will be told, hey, you are allergic to sulfur, so never take sulfur. But other people are taking Fansida. It doesn't mean because some people are allergic to sulfur, therefore Fansida is no longer a useful drug. For the same reason, when a vaccine has a particular side effect, the question is, how rampant is it in the general population? And it was found that the chance that you get a clot from AstraZeneca is so minimal that it was defined as an extremely rare occurrence. Just like sulfur, a sensitivity to sulfur is an extremely rare occurrence for Fansida. Does that mean therefore that AstraZeneca is bad? No. When we see myocarditis or heart inflammation arising from Moderna, does it mean that therefore Moderna is bad? No, because these myocarditis are extremely rare occurrence. This is the condition. Now, what happened originally is that because they saw that this particular occurrence of clots was happening in younger people, and they had the choice. They had other vaccines. They decided that, why don't we stop using AstraZeneca for this group and use it for this group? Because we have the choice. So it's not that the condition, the likelihood of the clot arising was worrying proportions. It was just out of choice. You're like, you have two cars and you think you want to get where you're going faster, therefore you choose the one that's faster. That doesn't mean the other car is bad. So they had choice, okay? That's number one. But yet, even with that choice, we haven't seen, ladies and gentlemen, we have actually given 5 billion doses of COVID vaccines globally. 5 billion doses of COVID vaccines have been given. If indeed the COVID vaccines had huge safety issues, can you imagine how many challenges we'll be seeing on social media, people saying so and so? 5 billion doses have been given, yet we haven't seen a huge scale of people complaining about side effects. So the vaccines, because of this large-scale administration, the data available shows that the vaccines are safe. The concerns on safety arise because data is being collected, and of course the scientific community must report what is being seen, must study it. And when they study it, they say it is an extremely rare occurrence, therefore it's acceptable. Just like any other medication, including aspirin, including paracetamol, including the antibiotics you take. All of them, if you read the leaflet, they have listed side effects that may occur. So AstraZeneca, safe, effective, and the only reason it is the main one coming to Africa is because it was the first one to be approved and available. Pfizer and Moderna were not available at all. They were locked up in the US. They were not being produced for export. AstraZeneca company decided to make sure there was available volume for the world, especially by enrolling through license another manufacturing plant in India called Serum Institute, which is actually the world's biggest vaccine manufacturer for children. So it's not that it is any less. And this vaccine we are getting in Africa called Covishield is the same as the vaccine we get called AstraZeneca. It's actually an AstraZeneca vaccine. It's just that they decided to give it a brand name called Covishield. But it's the same AstraZeneca as what is being manufactured in South Korea, in Europe. Just India said, decided, let's call it Covishield. Another factory called theirs Vaxzevria, exactly the same. And it has been the one available to be delivered to many African countries, including it has been the predominant vaccine for the UK, been the predominant vaccine for many other countries in Europe. Storage, Moderna and Pfizer. There is a question around that. Now, we know that because of the way Moderna and Pfizer are manufactured, they're manufactured using this thing we call messenger RNA, which is extremely unstable under normal conditions because it's not inside any vector or carrier. It is on its own in the vaccine. And if it's stored under normal temperature, it's going to denature and become useless. Therefore, the manufacturer said the best place to store it is store it at -70 degrees. However, when you finally deliver it to where you need to give it and you unpack it, you can store it. You can store it for up to a month under 2 to 8 degrees in a fridge and administer it. So this -70 is when you are storing for a long time, when you are transporting, and therefore what is happening is that they are being delivered in ultra cold chain packs. So Moderna and Pfizer are coming already packed in -70. That's how they're being delivered. So when the government in any country receives them, they then keep them in those packs and deliver them to the rural facilities in those packs. But when the community facility or the health facility opens them, it then stores them at normal 2 to 8 degrees, but ensures that it is going to use them within a particular time. So we are able to provide them in any country as long as this cold chain is being obeyed. So this is exactly where we are. So let me see whether there is one final question. When to vaccinate? Now, I've had people ask, when should I vaccinate? Now, if you have a flu or a common cold, or you have some symptoms of some sort, or you are unwell, don't vaccinate until you get well. I wait for your symptoms to go, vaccinate. And that's not new for COVID. Many of us here who have children and have taken our children for vaccination, when you go to the clinic, you're told if your child has a fever, you're told wait for the fever to go, then bring the child back. So it's normal practice that we don't vaccinate people who are sick, who are unwell. So number one, if you have any symptoms or you're unwell, wait for them to go, then get vaccinated. Two, what if you have COVID? When do you get vaccinated after the COVID? There's a lot of confusion. I've had people saying they have been told to wait for 90 days, which is 3 months. The actual recommendation by World Health Organization, by CDC or Centers for Disease Control, is that as soon as you qualify to go out of isolation, meaning we have a protocol, if you are positive, you are asked to stay home for at least 10 days. And after those 10 days, you wait for about 3 days and then you can leave your isolation. This means that as soon as you qualify to leave isolation, you actually qualify to get vaccinated. If you are actually actively sick with COVID, you follow the same. You have the same rules you have for isolation. Isolate yourself for at least minimum 10 days from the time you had your first symptom. Wait for the symptoms to end. And from the time the symptoms are over, you wait for 3 days to leave isolation. Then you qualify for vaccination. So generally, because people are not experts in this and you can't remember all these, normally I advise people that as long as you don't have symptoms or your last symptom ends, wait for 14 days. It's a safe period to say. Wait for 14 days, 2 weeks, and get vaccinated. At least that's easier to remember. Not that the science recommends follow the isolation protocol, but for you to remember easily, from your last symptom after you got infected, wait for 14 days, and after that, you can seek a vaccine. If you did not have symptoms, but you got tested positive, wait for 14 days from the time you got your last test, if you have no symptoms, and get vaccinated, okay? People asking how effective is Sinovac. There are any vaccine that has been approved by WHO is effective in protecting you from hospitalization. Again, the best vaccine is the vaccine in your arm. I have seen people die as they wait for the vaccine. I've seen people die saying, this one is not good, let me wait for this other one. Then they get infected and they die. I've seen people die because they decided, we don't have enough information about this because, the past I have hypertension, so let's wait a little. Then they get infected, they die. The best vaccine is the one in your arm. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to stop there so that we respect everyone's time. This has been recorded. We are going to review the comments. We are going to review the questions, and we are going to see how we can then package, some of them, because we can't do everything, so that we are able to provide this to you. But please make sure, I have just said, somebody has asked, Sanwanjiro, you've asked, please advise those who are senior citizen diabetes, hypertension are shying away. I've just said it. Tell them to get vaccinated. There's no danger. I don't know where this fear came from. There's no paper that says you get vaccinated and you have hypertension, there's a problem. So this fear is actually self-generated. It is self-generated. Please tell them they need the vaccine. They're the ones who need the vaccine most. If you have hypertension or diabetes, you need the vaccine most, because if you get COVID, you're more likely to develop severe disease. This fear, I don't know where it came from. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. I am glad that we had so many participants. We had over 300 participants on this webinar. We will package what we can. Have a good night. Take care of yourself. And please tell people to get vaccinated so that we can save everyone's life and we can get back to our livelihood sooner. Thank you, and God bless you. Bye-bye for now. And thank you to Elizabeth and Maurice for supporting this webinar, for you to making it happen. Elizabeth Ntonjira, Maurice Matheka, I thank you for making this effective and for streaming it on Facebook and YouTube as you did. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.